Hey everybody, my name is Dom. In this video, I want to take a deep dive into Sanguine as an archetype. I will include a sample list for the set 13 format at the end, but this is not a deck profile. This video didn't start out as a Sanguine breakdown. My last big project was the set 8 dirt video. I intended to do a follow-up to discuss the transformative set 9 wave of dirt support, but I didn't get around to it until after my set 10 teams event. As I was working on that video, the scope started becoming broader and less format sensitive, and I ended up shelving it for a while to look deeper into one particular topic. That topic being sister archetypes. In the Dirt video, I noted that Disdain, Sanguine, and to a lesser extent Amulet Haven were all variations of A plus B mechanics. Different flavors of a similar concept. In writing that video, I made the claim that the most similar mechanic to Dirt was Sanguine. With the release of Yodelant in set 13, Amulet Haven can now be built in a way that is closer to Dirt than any other deck. But that is only on the mechanical level. Sanguine still has meta similarities that got me interested in looking at the archetype much more closely. Both Sanguine and Dirt are foundational mechanics of their respective crafts. I think it's kind of neat that Spell Chain and Necrocharge are also foundational mechanics that present variations of a similar idea. I remember Abyss being criticized during set 1 for lacking identity and feeling like blood and shadow crammed together rather than being truly blended. Personally, I think that argument came more from an emotional place than a critical one. I would consider Rune to be equally divided in its concepts, but I don't recall Rune receiving criticisms of the same vein. That similarity isn't why I wanted to look deeper into Sanguine, though. What I find more interesting and more valuable to my goal of understanding Dirt better is the similar developer treatment the two archetypes have received. Both archetypes regularly receive non-support cards that use the mechanic. By non-support cards, I mean cards that are very clearly not intended to be direct support for the decks. Rather, they are often somewhat generic cards that see the opportunity to use the mechanic. An example for Sanguine would be a card like Howling Demon that feels intended for a late game oriented good stuff pile type of deck, rather than a dedicated Sanguine build. Or My Life, My Sounds, having a Sanguine effect that is more of an incidental bonus. For Dirt, cards like Concentration and Wizardess of Oz are generically applicable tools that happen to interact with the Dirt mechanic. Maybe that's not the right way to look at those cards, though. We could just as easily say the devs created a push for divergent deck styles using pre-existing support as a jumping off point. Sanguine started as an aggro deck, but that doesn't mean the devs can't push a mid-range or control variant. Same for Dirt. It started as a mid-range deck. Who's to say it can't be a control deck, though? The specific similarity that sparked this video is the set 9 Dirt support and the set 13 Sanguine support. The two archetypes received roughly equal quantity of support. Why did the set 9 Dirt support push that deck to the forefront of the meta, while the set 13 Sanguine support did not do the same? What was different about the quality of the support? That's what this video is really about. Let's start by going into some fundamentals. First, conceptual fundamentals. At the most basic level, paying life is a cost. Paying life is a downside. Playing Sanguine triggers is inherently negative. In the majority of matchups, the win condition of both players is to reduce their opponent's life to 0. Each time you activate Sanguine, you are actively hurting yourself. You are decreasing the amount of work your opponent needs to do to achieve their win condition. Do not forget this. Before you play a Sanguine trigger, just take a second to think about whether you are enabling a lethal line for your opponent. Maybe you can't make another play, but just take that second to think about it. Next, broadly speaking, self-damage is a balancing lever, and for Abyss specifically, it is a bit of a nebulous one. Sometimes the cost or effect of a card is made worse because the self-ping it offers is considered either a benefit or the purpose of the card. An example here would be something like Blood Moon. Other times, a self-ping is applied to make the card worse for its cost. A great example of this is Path to Purgatory. I bring this up because I see some people fall into the trap that self-damage cards need a payoff, that you need a reason to do it, or that any card with a self-ping was made for Sanguine. I want to discourage this mindset and suggest that the best practice is to look at a card's base functionality first, and its application in Sanguine second. Look at Demonium. This is just a standalone good Abyss card. The life cost is an interesting way to add flexibility to the card. Either it's a cheap ward that heals you, or it's a cheap, powerful blocker / annoying threat. The ability for the card to trigger Sanguine or offer a life buffer to keep paying for Sanguine triggers is absolutely an application of the card, but that does not mean it must be played in Sanguine or that it can only be played in Sanguine. Keep this in mind when we look at Aluzard later. Mechanically, Sanguine is pretty simple, but there are some insights to be gained by thinking about the basics. First off, Sanguine is a straightforward A plus B mechanic. We play a trigger, then play a payoff. That's all it is. While there are a range of potential payoffs, the triggers always fall into two camps. There are those that only harm your leader, and those that also hit your opponent. If you don't play against Sanguine often, just double check any time your opponent says their ping hits you. And as the Sanguine player, make sure to be familiar with the cards that hit your opponent so you don't miss any damage. Sanguine is a binary mechanic. It is either on or off. You cannot be more Sanguine if you hit yourself more. Combining this with the idea that hitting ourselves is inherently a downside, we can say that at a base level, we are incentivized to play as few triggers as possible. We do not want to hit ourselves more, nor do we benefit from doing so. The base cost of a trigger is 1 play point, established in set 1 with Dire Bond and Ambling Wraith, and that's still true to this day. That means we need to add 1 to the cost of any Sanguine payoff in order to see its real cost. Dark General might say she costs 4, but in order to get the Storm, the effect we included the card in the deck for, we need to pay 5. Notably though, because Sanguine is binary, we only need to pay that extra 1 play point for the trigger once per turn. If we can play multiple payoffs in a turn, the second or even third become extra efficient. Cheating this cost, and saving health in the process, can enable high power turns and is much easier to do with cheaper Sanguine payoffs. It is easiest to do with 1 play point payoffs. Cygames clearly recognizes this aspect of the mechanic, since the only 1 cost Sanguine payoff in the game is Skeleton Fighter from set 1. Even looking ahead to set 18, the current format in Japan, Skeleton Fighter is still the only 1 cost payoff. To me, that is a very clear sign that the potential power of Sanguine payoffs drastically increases as the cost of the card goes down. Finally, I think we can consider delayed triggers or prepaid triggers to be a form of ramp. A moment ago, I said Dark General effectively costs 5. She should be a turn 5 play. However, cards like Demonium or the incredible Sanguine Necklace allow her to come down on turn 4 at full power. While we don't truly ramp and continue to play ahead of curve, this example demonstrates the unique strength of delayed triggers. When we see a card that lets us pre-invest play points for a potential swing turn, it needs to be considered seriously. So what can we take away from these fundamentals? At its baseline, we can say Sanguine as a mechanic incentivizes us to minimize triggers and maximize payoffs, since inherently triggers are bad and payoffs are good. We also want both the triggers and the payoffs to be as cheap as we can get, because 1, playing too many triggers increases our opponent's ability to kill us, in turn potentially decreasing game length and denying us the opportunity to play higher cost payoffs. 2, triggers that harm our opponent make it easier for us to kill them, in turn potentially decreasing game length and denying us the ability to play more expensive payoffs. 3, more expensive triggers push our payoffs back a turn. And finally, 4, cheaper payoffs can be more easily played alongside one another to cheat the cost of a trigger. I want to emphasize that this is a starting point for our understanding of Sanguine. As we begin to examine how Sanguine plays out in practice, we can see where Cygames has taken some creative approaches to build complexity on top of these basics. Now, with everything I said about trying not to play triggers, or as few as we can, let's look at Valnareik and Laura. These two fly right past everything I just said. These cards want you to hit yourself multiple times per turn. These cards break the default binary of Sanguine and allow you to become more Sanguine. So what gives? Why do these cards push so hard against the mechanical pressures of Sanguine? I think there are two main reasons we see this design. First, while conceptually Sanguine is strongest when you play minimal triggers, in practice, you need to run a high density of enablers to achieve any semblance of consistency in your games. This creates a few potential hand states. Ideal balance of enablers and payoffs. Excess enablers, too few payoffs. And too few enablers, excess payoffs. Assuming each of these hands is equally likely, we could say only 1 in 3 hands is good. By converting extra triggers into more payoffs, these two cards take one of the bad hand states and turn it into a good one. Now we're at 2 in 3 hands being good. In reality, the hand states aren't actually equally likely, nor are Valnareik and Laura fully salvaging bad hands. But I feel like this oversimplified example demonstrates some of the unwritten strengths of these cards. Beyond their effects being powerful, these cards also offer a form of consistency to the deck. The second reason I think Cygames has pushed, and looking to the future is continuing to push, this style of Sanguine payoff, is the way it narrows the amount of decks that can include them. Whether you see it as a positive or negative, more often than not, Cygames prints archetypal cards with heavy restrictions to limit their splashability. Selena is a very strong Haven card, but she requires you to commit to a sizable Wasteland package to access that power. In Set 8, we saw 2-cost Abyss running Kiss of Lust, Zealot of Lust, and sometimes Valnareik as a small Sanguine package that was low commitment and could be picked up by Arbiter. I think Cygames has decided that if they want to push a strong Sanguine payoff, they do not want to risk it being powerful outside of a dedicated Sanguine deck. And the best way to require that commitment is to require heavy use of Sanguine triggers. On the note of packages, let's take a second to look at the different shapes Sanguine can take. I would divide Sanguine into 2 camps. There are the dedicated variations and the incidental variations, and we can break those camps down into further subdivisions. First, the more committed builds. These are what come to my mind when I think about a capital S Sanguine deck. The focus of the deck is building around, utilizing, and winning directly as the result of multiple Sanguine payoffs. They more closely adhere to the mechanics I laid out earlier. These are the aggro builds of Sanguine. Starting in Set 5 with the release of Valnareik, the aggro Sanguine builds started diverging slightly into more traditional aggro strategies and more combo-oriented strategies. There are large overlaps in the two decks, especially in the enabler department, but I would say that it is more the result of card pool limitations than anything else. The traditional aggro builds are more focused on just curving out with high-pressure cards like Aragavi and very quickly getting the opponent into lethal range for a curve-topping finisher. That would be something like a Dark General or Mirrorbane. Cards that present a strong source of uninteractive damage, but not necessarily in high enough counts to win the game on their own. Dark General is a great play when the opponent is in the 4 to 8 health range. She is not great when the opponent is at 14. These builds also value the mutual damage ping effects much more highly. The more traditional builds can also include cards like Valnareik or Laura, but it might feel more like a begrudging inclusion than an enthusiastic one. The more combo-oriented builds lean much harder into enabling big Valnareik pushes. Enablers that multi-ping like Wings of Lust are much more valuable here. It is worth noting that the self-damage also tends to be higher as a result. The primary difference in the way these two variations play out is that the more traditional aggro builds are about steady pressure into modest lethal ranges, whereas the combo builds can sacrifice some early damage because their lethal turns can reach much higher. Again, there is a lot of overlap between the two, but I think we can clearly see where the strategies diverge. Looking forward, the combo direction is what will be receiving more continued support. The bigger difference comes when we look at the less dedicated Sanguine builds. I hesitate to even call these true Sanguine decks. I would rather call the decks by some other name and note the presence of a Sanguine package, then consider them to be true Sanguine builds. This is something we see most often in the control camp. During set 6, I regularly saw Aragavi included in Control Abyss to offer a late game threat with a board wipe. Wings of Lust was already included in the deck to act as a discard outlet to enable Death's Breath. So, Aragavi's Sanguine effect could occasionally be activated. As I was talking about earlier, 2-cost Abyss in set 8 also included a small Sanguine package. Right now, in the set 13 format, you can play an Ishilindrig-based control pile and run Blood Moon to search Darkfeast Bat, then use Sahakil and Israfil to trigger its fanfare twice. That's a really cool use of a Sanguine card. But I'm not going to call that deck Sanguine. If you're interested in the topic of naming decks, do check out my video on categories and concepts. Now, mid-range Sanguine is difficult to talk about. It is something that the devs have tried to push, but I feel like any time a dedicated full-on mid-range Sanguine with a capital S Sanguine deck starts getting refined, either the deck starts trimming the slower cards and moving towards aggro, or the deck starts trimming the Sanguine cards to a minimal package in favor of consistency and maintaining a higher life total. I think there's something fundamentally flawed with a dedicated non-aggro Sanguine strategy. How do you play a longer game with a deck that keeps hitting itself? You have to heal. How do you sustain 2-card combos turn after turn? You have to keep drawing cards. You have to actively keep replenishing 2 distinct, non-overlapping resources. When you burn through your life as a resource to gain an advantage, then turn around and spend that advantage on gaining life back, you threw away that advantage. I'm not sure how to best explain the issue, but my mind is drawn to dirt. You have a basic gameplay loop where you play your stacks, then play your payoffs, then play more stacks, then play more payoffs. This only stops when you run out of cards. Slower Sanguine doesn't feel like it can accomplish the same loop. For Sanguine, you hit yourself and play a payoff. Hit yourself and play a payoff. There's a problem there. If you keep hitting yourself, eventually you die. You are limited on cards and your life total. I think this is one of the bigger reasons slower Sanguine strategies have never panned out. In order to sustain a longer game, the way something like Dirt can, Sanguine has to do more work. You can't just sustain your hand size. You also need to heal. And that healing isn't the same healing as Dirt. Dirt heals to undo damage the opponent has dealt and make them work harder for lethal. For Sanguine's healing to achieve the same effect, it has to heal off all the life it lost to its own triggers first, and then continue to heal after. The starting line is not the same. This could certainly be a card pool issue. Riley, particularly when combined with Caradwen, makes Dirt's loop way smoother. Your stacks find Riley, who draws more stacks, which lets you keep playing Rileys, all while fighting for board or pushing damage. Strong healing has demonstrated to be one of the most powerful effects to give a deck access to, so I don't really expect Cygames to take a risk on providing Sanguine with enough healing to push slower strategies within the archetype, especially considering the potential for other Abyss decks to splash a Sanguine package. With all those meta concepts laid out, I think we can get into purposeful deck building. I want to start with a few claims. I believe utilizing Valnareik is the strongest thing you can do with Sanguine. She is the reason to play Sanguine. Supporting that, Demonium and Hazan are absolutely phenomenal cards, and are the reasons Sanguine even has any remote playability. You can take the deck in a different direction if you want, but I think a combo-oriented aggro strategy is the way to go. I'm going to touch on a couple specific card choices, then show the list. Wings of Lust is incredible. It offers so much utility to this deck. It is the cheapest multi-pinger we can get. A+B mechanics appreciate hand filtering, and Sanguine is no different. While Laura and Valnareik may convert extra enablers into more payoffs, that doesn't fully eliminate the situations where you have a hand full of enablers and need to draw into some action. The snipe function is notably very good with Laura, particularly on turn 3. That being said, it isn't the best enabler in the deck. That title goes to Sanguine Necklace. This card checks all the boxes. It costs 1, so it's as cheap of an activator as we can get. We can very easily play this alongside Demonium or Hazan in the mid game compared to something like a Zealot of Lust, but that's standard for all 1-cost triggers. What's really special about this card is that it's a delayed trigger. Every other delayed trigger costs 2. It's also an amulet, which basically guarantees you will be able to utilize the trigger. There is a world of difference there. Blood Moon is the closest thing we had to Sanguine Necklace prior to set 13. The tempo loss of playing Blood Moon versus Sanguine Necklace is massive. I used to be this card's biggest hater, but I have slowly come around to it. I still think it's bad, and I personally would not run it, but the power of an amulet-based delayed trigger is undeniable. I think we can draw comparisons to Maid Leader and Heartless Battle. Both of those cards are very low tempo, just like Blood Moon. The difference is the quality of the payoff. When Heartless Battle sets up a combo 5 Anastasia plus Sukuna turn, that can win the game on the spot. Maid Leader is only really seen in slower styles of sword, like Natura and 1-cost Spartacus, where you typically are searching high-quality removal to use quickly to recover from that tempo loss. While Blood Moon can enable Hazan for that high quality of removal, it does not search him. And the closest thing to an auto-win board using Blood Moon would be some kind of turn 7 Dark Feast Bat Sahakil. And that isn't really an auto-win, if we're being honest. Maybe in the long term, running what is effectively copies 4, 5, or 6 of Sanguine Necklace increases the deck's win rate, but I'm not convinced. Last up, I want to talk about Aluzard. This is a really cool card, but I want to present the question. Is this a Sanguine card? Earlier, I talked about falling into a trap of seeing any card that costs life as a Sanguine card. Blood Arts is a Sanguine enabler, but is Aluzard a capital S Sanguine card, or is he just a very thematic blood card? A vampire that uses blood or life for power? I lean more to the latter. That doesn't mean he can't work in Sanguine. There is synergy there. But I don't think enabling Sanguine is the primary purpose of this card. Aluzard is an engine card. He is a continuously recurring threat that offers medium removal and healing. For Sanguine specifically, he is also a value card, in that he is effectively drawing a card when you evolve him. For this deck, he is very, very slow. Notice that the final big stat gain on this card requires all 3 of your Evo copies to be used up, which means the 4th Aluzard is the one that gets the full effect, but he won't be able to attack the turn he comes out without external aid. You will likely need the 2/2 Aluzard to survive for a turn to get guaranteed value from the last line of text on Blood Arts. Let's say a normal game sees you Evoing him on curve and getting 1 revive off. That means the first Aluzard is a 3-cost 3/3 Evo that says draw a card. And the second Aluzard is a 2-cost 5/3 Evo that says activate Sanguine and heal 3. That's fine, but not really something that I think an aggro deck is in the market for. The only times I have been really impressed by this card are when I open 2 copies of it and can stagger the free summon. That enables lines where you quickly churn through all of your Evos and stockpile 2 or even 3 Blood Arts. Now, the moment one of your free threats survives a turn, you can win the game on the spot, or create something absurd like a 20-point life swing. Realistically though, what this card is doing in normal circumstances is gaining you 3 life every other turn while providing the opportunity to trigger Sanguine if that is something your deck can utilize. He is a serviceable card, but I would not call him anything more than that. My personal recommendation, if you want to play Aluzard, is to mess around with a janky Wasteland pile where you can treat him sort of like an Ilgano to pop with Soul Conversion or Great Pick Corpse, and you can use the mounts to get more value out of the drain on Blood Arts, or even enable the drain without using your Evo on Aluzard. My personal speculation is that that's what his intended home was, and the Sanguine synergy was tacked on to give him a little more room for experimentation. I think with my thoughts on Aluzard laid out, we can sort of answer my question from the beginning of the video. What was different about Set 13 Sanguine from Set 9 Dirt that made the impact of their support waves so different? I feel comfortable saying Sanguine Necklace is on the same tier as Beast-Faced Mage and Summoning Drill in terms of quality support. Another card on their level would have been great, though. The impactful difference comes from looking at the legendaries. Caradwyn and Faust play absolutely fantastic alongside one another. Caradwyn is a mud guzzler, and Faust has the stack generation to provide. Faust isn't a great play when you are behind on board. That is, unless you have a Caradwyn engrave and can replay her with Mirror of Truth, at which point Faust is pretty good at cleaning up a board. These cards are great on their own and make each other better. Aluzard and Laura, on the other hand, do not have that same level of synergy. Aluzard is only loosely a Sanguine card. He doesn't push what I think Sanguine is trying to do. Laura does. Blood Arts can combo with Laura's removal effect to address the board, but I think that is a mild synergy. Aluzard benefits from longer games with a higher turn count, where you can gain increasing amounts of value from his recursion, whereas Laura is primarily a cheap storm card that wants to minimize turn count. Her aggressively slanted stat line is easy to remove, so your opponent is likely to have efficient answers for her after she swings in. Continuing to apply pressure after you play Laura prevents your opponent from capitalizing on the value they start gaining after you present them with easy trades. That's not to say you can't run them in the same deck. You could make an argument that Aluzard providing value offsets the value you lose by playing Laura, but I think you start to dilute the focus of your strategy when you do. I've been able to play a modest amount of games on Sanguine during the incredibly short set 13 format, something like 30 total games on various builds. This is the list that felt best to me, but I am by no means confident this is optimal. I find Sanguine to be a difficult deck to optimize. Because the majority of cards that want to be included in this style of deck are actively attacking the opponent, they should all feel pretty good when you play them. Cards like Grudge Teller or the new Grimnir. To me, that makes evaluating whether a card is good enough a struggle. Aragavi sure looks amazing when he pops off, but would the deck's win rate increase if he were a cheaper card or another consistency piece? Are losses the result of a suboptimal deck choice, or is the archetype just not at the same power level as the competition? If you always get your opponent to 1 life, but never 0, are the games actually close? Personally, I don't think Sanguine is strong enough to worry about optimizing unless it's the only deck you play. I would recommend just doing your best to make a coherent strategy around whatever cards you like most. It is fine to play for fun. In set 9, you could not get me to take Humpty Dumpty or Stella out of my dirt deck. And that's the end of the video. Thanks for checking it out. I am by no means an authority on Sanguine. I've played it more in the past couple weeks than I have in the past year and a half. So a lot of the ideas here are fresh thoughts for me. If you have more thoughts on the archetype and you want to correct something that I maybe oversimplified or didn't expand on enough in this video, feel free to do so. Write a comment. Don't hesitate to chat me up on the community Discord and just say hi if you see me playing some webcam games. Bye.